The afternoon sun stretched long shadows across the Mediterranean as one of the most unequal air battles in history was about to unfold. Within minutes, the Luftwaffe would lose between 24 and 59 transport aircraft. Sources differ on exact numbers, in what American pilots would call the Palm Sunday massacre. German records would confirm 24 Ju-52 transports destroyed and 35 damaged, while American claims ranged from 50 to 70 aircraft destroyed. But the discrepancy in numbers mattered less than the psychological shock. In roughly 15 minutes of fighting, American P-40 Warhawks demonstrated air superiority so complete that German assumptions about the war's outcome began to fracture. The engagement would pit 47 P-40 Warhawks and 12 RAF Spitfires against 65 German Ju-52 transports escorted by approximately 15 Bf-109s and 4 to 5 Bf-110s. The result would be devastating for the Luftwaffe. At least 24 transports confirmed destroyed, 35 damaged, and 9 Bf-109s and 1 Bf-110 shot down against American losses of 6 P-40s and 1 Spitfire. This overwhelming kill ratio represented not just tactical success, but the revelation of American air dominance that German doctrine had considered impossible. What the Germans flying that Palm Sunday afternoon didn't know was that ultra-intelligence had compromised their every communication, that American pilots had trained specifically for this moment, and that the industrial democracy they had been taught to disdain had produced aviators capable of methodical, efficient destruction. By April 1943, the Afrika Korps position in Tunisia had become desperate. Trapped between Montgomery's 8th Army advancing from the east and American forces pushing from the west, roughly 250,000 German and Italian troops depended entirely on aerial supply. The Mediterranean had become a graveyard for Axis shipping. Allied forces operating from Malta were sinking vessels at an unsustainable rate. Operation Flax, the Allied effort to sever this aerial lifeline, had begun on April 5, 1943. Unlike previous isolated interceptions, Flax represented organized interdiction based on ultra-intelligence. Allied codebreakers at Bletchley Park were reading German communications in near real time, providing American and British squadrons with detailed information about transport schedules, routes, and escort strength. The Luftwaffe had assembled every available transport aircraft for the Tunisia supply missions. The backbone of this effort was the Junkers Ju-52 trimotor, a dependable workhorse that had served German forces from Spain to Crete. By April 1943, these transports were flying multiple missions daily from Sicily to Tunisia, each aircraft carrying critical supplies or evacuating wounded and specialist personnel. The Germans believed their transport operations remained relatively safe. They flew at extremely low altitude, often just 50 feet above the water to avoid radar detection. Fighter escorts from elite units like JG-27 and JG-53 provided protection. The timing of missions was varied to avoid predictable patterns. Yet all these precautions were meaningless when the enemy could read your messages. On the afternoon of April 18, 1943, a large German transport formation was returning to Sicily after delivering supplies to Tunisia. The formation consisted of 65 Ju-52 transports flying in tight protective formations, escorted by veteran pilots from 2nd Squadron JG-27 and elements of JG-53. These escort pilots were seasoned fighters of the Desert War, many with dozens of victories. But the escort faced a fundamental limitation: fuel capacity. Operating at maximum range, the Bf-109s had perhaps 20 to 30 minutes of combat fuel when over Cape Bon. Any prolonged engagement would force them to break off or risk ditching in the Mediterranean. This limitation, known to Allied intelligence through ultra-intercepts, would be ruthlessly exploited. On the Allied side, the 57th Fighter Group had been preparing for this moment. Based at El Jem in Tunisia, they had spent weeks training for large-scale transport interception. The group would commit all its squadrons to the mission, joined by the 314th Fighter Squadron of the 324th Fighter Group, totaling 47 P-40 Warhawks. Above them, 12 Spitfires from 92 Squadron RAF provided top cover. The P-40 Warhawk, while not the most advanced American fighter, had been steadily improved for Mediterranean operations. Modified superchargers allowed better altitude performance, while the .50 caliber machine guns had been harmonized for maximum effect at 250 yards, an ideal range for transport attack. At approximately 1,500 hours, the German formation was spotted flying northeast toward Sicily at extremely low altitude. Reports vary from 50 to 1,000 feet. The transports flew in tight V formations, a defensive arrangement that had offered mutual protection in earlier conflicts against concentrated fighter assault. However, this formation would become a trap. The Allied fighters were perfectly positioned. The P-40s approached at about 4,000 foot while the Spitfires held top cover at 15,000 feet. The setting sun was behind the Allied pilots, making them difficult to see until too late. The German formation, flying low over the water, was silhouetted against the sea ideal targets. When the Allied fighters struck, the German escort faced an impossible decision. Climbing to engage meant burning precious fuel and abandoning the transports. Staying low meant surrendering altitude advantage to the attackers. The escort commander chose to engage, ordering his fighters to climb and intercept the Americans. It was a courageous choice, but ultimately hopeless. What followed was less a battle than a systematic destruction. American P-40 pilots dove on the transport formation in successive waves, each selecting targets and attacking with machine-like precision. The defensive armament of the Ju-52s, typically one 13mm machine gun in a dorsal mount and two 7.92mm guns in the beam windows, proved utterly inadequate against the dense firepower of .50 caliber machine guns. According to Allied pilot accounts, passengers in the transports attempted to fight back with personal weapons, rifles and pistols fired through windows. This desperate resistance, though brave, was entirely futile against fast-moving fighters making high-speed passes. The thin aluminum skin of the G-52S offered no protection against .050 caliber rounds. The German fighter escort fought desperately, but was overwhelmed by numbers and tactical disadvantage. The Spitfires engaged them at altitude while P-4S continued to savage the transports. Below, German pilots later reported the frustration of watching their charges being destroyed while they fought for their own survival against superior numbers. Within minutes, the sea below was littered with burning wreckage. Some transports exploded in midair, others crashed into the water, and many attempted crash landings along the Sicilian coast. German sources would later confirm 24 G-52S destroyed outright and 35 damaged, many so severely they never flew again. German records documented the casualties from the transport aircraft: 20 air crew killed, 28 wounded, and 50 missing. Though these numbers likely represent only flight crew and may not include passengers. The transports were carrying more than just pilots and crew. They held ground. Personnel, administrators, wounded, soldiers being evacuated, and specialist technicians whose expertise was irreplaceable. Each destroyed transport represented not just material loss, but human tragedy. These were not combat troops, but support personnel, mechanics who maintained aircraft, communications specialists who operated radios, medical staff evacuating wounded. Their loss would German operations as surely as the destruction of combat units. American losses were comparatively light: 6 P-40S and 1 Spitfire, with their pilots either killed or captured. This stark disparity in losses, a kill ratio of at least 4-1 and possibly as high as 10:1 depending on which figures are used, demonstrated the complete tactical superiority achieved by the Allied forces. Declassified documents have revealed the crucial role of ultra intelligence in the Palm Sunday massacre. Allied Coderikers had provided complete details of the German transport schedule days in advance. American planners knew the number of aircraft, their routes, escort strength, and even cargo manifests. This intelligence advantage allowed optimal positioning of intercepting forces. The Allied fighters were already at altitude and in position when the Germans appeared. Fuel loads were calculated precisely for extended combat. Even the ammunition mixture, armor-piercing, incendiary, and tracer rounds, was optimized for destroying transport aircraft. The Germans never suspected their communications were compromised. Post-war interrogations revealed German commanders believed the interception was either lucky coincidence or the result of coast watchers. The possibility that enigma had been broken never occurred to them, allowing the Allies to continue exploiting this advantage throughout the war. At Luftwaffe headquarters in Rome, initial reports of the disaster were met with disbelief. Staff officers assumed the numbers were exaggerated or that panic had led to confusion. As confirmation arrived from multiple sources, surviving aircraft, Italian observers, German naval units picking up survivors, the scale of the catastrophe became undeniable. General Feld Marshal Albert Kessler, commanding German forces in the Mediterranean, immediately suspended daylight transport operations. His war diary for April 18 contains a 2 entry. Daylight transport operations have become impossible. Night operations only. Until further notice. Hitler's reaction was predictably extreme. He demanded courts-martial for the escort. Commanders accused the transport pilots of cowardice and ordered immediate reinforcement of Mediterranean fighter strength, orders that were impossible to fulfill given stretched German resources. The Palm Sunday massacre effectively ended German daylight aerial supply to Tunisia, combined with the interdiction of sea routes. This severed the Africa COR supply line at a critical moment. Units that had maintained defensive positions despite material shortages now faced complete logistical collapse. General Hans-Jürgen von, commanding Army Group Africa, recognized the implications immediately. Without aerial resupply, his forces could hold for weeks at best. The surrender of Axis forces in North Africa on May 13, 1943, less than a month after Palm Sunday, was accelerated by the transportation crisis created by the massacre. Beyond immediate tactical effects, Palm Sunday demonstrated American air superiority in the Mediterranean. German forces that had depended on Luftwaffe support for every operation now knew they would fight without air cover. This psychological blow affected morale throughout the Wehrmacht. The Palm Sunday massacre revealed technological disparities that shocked German participants. The P-40 Warhawk, which German intelligence had classified as obsolete, demonstrated capabilities beyond German expectations. Modified engines allowed operations at altitudes Germans thought impossible for the type. Improved gun sights provided accuracy that seemed impossibly precise. According to German reports, more fundamentally, American radios worked reliably. Every P-40 pilot could communicate clearly with wingmen and flight leaders, allowing coordinated attacks impossible for German formations plagued by radio failures. This basic technological advantage, reliable communication, translated directly into tactical superiority. American maintenance and logistics also proved superior. The P-40's operating over Cape Bond had been maintained at high operational readiness despite desert conditions. Spare parts were abundant. Fuel was plentiful, and ammunition was never in short supply. German units, by contrast, struggled with chronic shortages of everything. Perhaps the most decisive factor was the vast gap in pilot training. American pilots participating in Palm Sunday averaged over 300 flight hours before entering combat. They had practiced formation, flying, gunnery, navigation, and combat tactics in the safe skies of the United States. They arrived in theater already proficient in their aircraft. German pilots, by contrast, were products of an increasingly abbreviated training Program: fuel shortages meant minimal flight hours. Instructor pilots were pulled into combat units. Training: aircraft were requisitioned for operations, the systematic training that had produced the Luftwaffe's early excellence had collapsed under the pressures of multi-front war. This disparity would only worsen as the war continued. By late 1943, American pilots would average 400 hours of training, while Germans averaged 80. The Palm Sunday massacre was not an aberration, but a preview of the Luftwaffe's systematic destruction. Palm Sunday was not an isolated incident but part of the sustained Operation Flax campaign. On April 5, Allied fighters had already destroyed 14 J-52s and damaged many others. On April 10, another sweep netted 20 transports. On April 19, the day after Palm Sunday, South African Air Force squadrons shot down 16 Italian SM-82 transports. The culmination came on April 22 when Allied fighters intercepted a formation of Mi-323 Gigantes, massive six-engine transports that were the largest aircraft in the Mediterranean theater. 14 of 16 Gigantes were destroyed, each carrying 12 tons of desperately needed fuel. Of 138 crew members aboard the Gigantes, only 19 survived. These cumulative losses, over 100 transport aircraft in less than 3 weeks, crippled German aerial supply capability, not just in the Mediterranean, but across all theaters. The Luftwaffe transport fleet never recovered from the losses sustained during Operation Flax. The Palm Sunday massacre marked a turning point in the Luftwaffe's effectiveness. The transport losses were irreplaceable, but more damaging was the loss of experienced crew. Each destroyed Ju-52 typically carried a pilot with hundreds or thousands of hours of experience, a co-pilot, and a radio operator/gunner. Expertise that took years to develop. The psychological impact on Luftwaffe morale was devastating. Transport pilots, who had operated with relative impunity early in the war, now knew they were flying death traps. Fighter pilots knew they couldn't protect their charges. Ground forces knew they couldn't depend on aerial resupply. Within the German High Command, Palm Sunday forced recognition that the air war was lost. If the Luftwaffe couldn't protect transport aircraft in daylight, how could it defend German cities from the bomber offensive that was clearly coming? The massacre over Cape Bon preaged the destruction that would rain on Germany itself. For American forces, Palm Sunday was vindication of their entire approach to warfare. Systematic training, technological superiority, and industrial production had produced tactical dominance. Young Americans, products of a democratic society that Nazi ideology dismissed as weak, had demonstrated lethal efficiency. The 57th Fighter Group received a Distinguished Unit Citation for the action. Individual pilots who had scored multiple victories became aces in a single engagement. But beyond official recognition, Palm Sunday gave American pilots confidence that would carry through the rest of the war. The massacre also validated American tactical doctrine. Rather than emphasizing individual heroics, American training stressed teamwork, fire discipline, and mission accomplishment. This systematic approach, derided by some as lacking warrior spirit, had proved devastatingly effective. Both sides used Palm Sunday for propaganda, though with vastly different effectiveness. American newsreels showed gun camera footage of German transports exploding with titles like Easter Egg Hunt over Tunisia and Luftwaffe's Black Sunday. The footage, while sanitized, conveyed American air superiority dramatically. German propaganda struggled to explain the disaster. Initial attempts to deny the losses collapsed when neutral observers confirmed American claims. Attempts to blame Italian treachery or mechanical failure were undermined by survivor testimony. Eventually, German propaganda portrayed the losses as heroic sacrifice, with transport crews dying to supply surrounded comrades. Within the Wehrmacht, however, the truth spread quickly. Soldiers made dark jokes about the Luftwaffe's Easter eggs that cracked at first touch. Songs mocking German intelligence became popular. The myth of Luftwaffe superiority, carefully cultivated since Spain died over Cape Bon. The Palm Sunday massacre's effects extended far beyond immediate tactical results. Hitler, shocked by the losses, diverted fighters from the Eastern Front to the Mediterranean, weakening German forces before the crucial Battle of Kursk. The Americans, emboldened by success, accelerated plans for the invasion of Sicily and daylight bombing of Germany. Within German military circles, Palm Sunday became a case study in the danger of underestimating American capabilities. Officers who had dismissed Americans as amateur warriors were forced to recognize that American industrial and organizational capabilities had produced highly effective military forces. The massacre influenced German officers who would later participate in resistance against Hitler. The demonstration of American military superiority convinced many that the war was unwinnable. If America could achieve such dominance in the Mediterranean, what would happen when their full strength reached Europe? Military historians consider the Palm Sunday massacre one of the most one-sided air battles of World War II. While the exact number of German aircraft destroyed remains debated, German records show 24 J-52s destroyed and 35 damaged, while American claims ranged up to 70 destroyed. The tactical and strategic impact is undeniable. The engagement demonstrated several principles that would define air warfare for the remainder of the conflict. Intelligence superiority enables tactical surprise. Technological advantages must be systematically exploited. Training quality matters more than combat experience. Coordination beats individual excellence, and industrial capacity translates directly into combat power. Modern air forces study Palm Sunday as an example of successful interdiction operations. The systematic destruction of enemy transport capability achieved through intelligence, planning, and execution remains a model for contemporary air campaigns. The Palm Sunday massacre raises uncomfortable questions about the nature of modern warfare. The German transports were legitimate military objectives carrying supplies to enemy forces, yet they also carried human beings, many of them non-combatants such as medical staff and administrators, who perished tragically. American pilots involved in the operation experienced complex emotions about their success. They had executed their duty efficiently, but many were troubled by the one-sided character of the confrontation. Shooting down nearly defenseless transports, while necessary, lacked the prestige of fighter-to-fighter combat. These moral dilemmas illustrate the shift of warfare from individual duels to industrial-scale destruction. The Americans were not seeking fame but completing a mission. They killed effectively, systematically, without hatred, yet also without mercy. This was modern warfare, impersonal, technological, and devastatingly efficient. The Palm Sunday massacre provides lasting lessons for military professionals. First, superior intelligence can enable tactical victories that are disproportionate to the forces engaged. Second, achieving air superiority allows systematic destruction of enemy logistics. Third, industrial capability and training infrastructure are decisive in prolonged conflicts. The operation also highlighted the vulnerability of air transport missions when air dominance is absent. Modern militaries, reflecting on Palm Sunday, have heavily invested in defensive systems for transport aircraft and stressed the importance of air superiority before undertaking large-scale aerial logistics. Finally, Palm Sunday demonstrates how rapidly air dominance can shift. The Luftwaffe, which had controlled European skies from 1939 to 1941, found itself powerless over Cape Bon in 1943. No advantage in warfare is permanent. Continuous adaptation and innovation are essential. The Palm Sunday massacre lasted roughly 15 minutes, yet its effects resonated through the rest of World War II and beyond. During those brief moments over Cape Bon, American fighters did more than destroy German aircraft, they showcased the rise of American air power as the dominant force it would remain for decades. The Germans, stunned by the speed and scale of their losses, experienced more than tactical surprise. They were witnessing a new military reality. Industrial democracy, fully mobilized and effectively led, could generate combat power surpassing anything authoritarian regimes could muster. The massacre proved that technological superiority, systematic training, and industrial capacity could outweigh experience, individual skill, and ideological zeal. The Americans had transformed warfare into a science, and science was surpassing the warrior mystique that had brought German forces early victories. The Palm Sunday massacre stands as a pivotal moment in aerial warfare. In roughly 15 minutes on April 18, 1943, American fighters destroyed or damaged between 59 and 70 German aircraft. The precise number is less important than the psychological impact. The Luftwaffe's transport capability in the Mediterranean was shattered, directly contributing to the collapse of Axis forces in North Africa. More importantly, Palm Sunday illustrated the effectiveness of American military doctrine, systematic training, emphasis on technological advantage, integration of intelligence into operations, and industrial capacity to sustain combat all produced tactical dominance. Young Americans, dismissed by Nazi ideology as products of a weak democracy, proved themselves lethal warriors. The Germans, confronting losses of unprecedented scale, were experiencing more than defeat. They were witnessing the emergence of American military supremacy that would shape the rest of the war and the post-war world. The industrial democracy they had mocked produced warriors more effective than Nazi ideology could anticipate. For military professionals, Palm Sunday remains a case study in the effective application of air power. Intelligence superiority enabled tactical surprise, technological advantages were systematically exploited, training proved decisive, and industrial capacity translated directly into combat effectiveness. Transport pilots departing Tunisia that Palm Sunday expected a routine flight back to Sicily. Their fighter escort, veterans of years of combat, were confident in their ability to safeguard their charges. Within 15 minutes, that confidence was shattered alongside their aircraft. The Americans achieved more than a tactical victory, they demonstrated a new form of warfare that would dominate the century. The Palm Sunday massacre, brief at roughly 15 minutes of intense fighting, altered the nature of air warfare forever. The era of individual warrior heroes was ending. The age of systematic, technological air power had arrived. The Germans, shocked by events, were witnessing the birth of American air supremacy that would reshape global conflict. Ultimately, the Palm Sunday massacre revealed a core truth of modern warfare: victory favors not the bravest or most experienced, but those who most effectively integrate intelligence, technology, training, and industrial capability into overwhelming combat power. On April 18, 1943, over the clear blue Mediterranean, American fighters demonstrated this truth with decisive clarity. The Germans could scarcely believe it, yet belief was irrelevant. The aircraft were destroyed, the men were lost, and the outcome of the war grew increasingly certain. The legacy of those 15 minutes over Cape Bon continues to influence military strategy. Air forces worldwide study the engagement, drawing lessons on the importance of air superiority, the vulnerability of transport aircraft, and the decisive role of intelligence in modern conflict. The Palm Sunday massacre was more than a tactical victory, it was a demonstration of how modern wars would be conducted in one